Every credible energy forecast had the same timeline. 2027, maybe 2028. That's when Canada's Trans Mountain expansion would finally reach full utilization, 890,000 barrels a day. The models agreed. The analysts were patient. April 2026 shattered that patience. Utilization surged into the high 90s, practically maxed out, 2 full years ahead of every projection on the board. A pipeline that critics had buried as over budget and behind schedule just snapped into the single most strategically valuable piece of infrastructure on the continent. And the force that snapped it had nothing to do with anything inside Canada. What you're about to see is what I call structural optionality, the framework connecting a tremor thousands of kilometers from Canadian soil to the exact moment this country's trade leverage with the United States quietly, permanently reversed. It starts with a choke point. One narrow strait, half a world away. The Strait of Hormuz, 20 million barrels a day. Roughly 1 in every 5 barrels of oil traded on the planet squeezes through that narrow corridor of water between Iran and Oman, barely 33 kilometers wide at its tightest point. When that flow got disrupted, the shockwave didn't stay in the Persian Gulf. It radiated outward at the speed of a trading desk phone call. Asian refineries, Japan, South Korea, India, China, are structurally dependent on crude transiting the Strait of Hormuz. When supply through that choke point became unreliable, these buyers didn't sit around waiting for diplomatic resolutions or UN statements. They did what any rational actor does facing an existential input shortage. They scrambled for every secure, accessible barrel they could find anywhere on the planet with functioning export infrastructure. And that scramble is where the geography of pipelines becomes destiny. Throughout most of 2024 and into early 2025, the Trans Mountain expansion was operating at a modest 82 to 84% utilization, roughly 730,000 to 750,000 barrels per day, according to CAR market data. Respectable throughput, but nowhere near the system's ceiling. Full capacity? That was a 22-28 story. The pipeline was doing its job quietly, moving barrels, no headlines, no urgency. Then the Strait of Hormuz changed this math overnight. Asian buyers, suddenly cut off from their most reliable Middle Eastern supply routes, turned to the only major Pacific-facing crude export terminal in North America, Canada's Westridge Marine Terminal in Burnaby, British Columbia, the final outlet of the TMX system. Tanker bookings surged, nominations spiked. And by March 2026 at Zero Week in Houston, Trans Mountain CEO Mark Mackey confirmed what the shipping data had already been screaming. The system had reached basically full, so utilization in the high 90s. What was supposed to take until 2028 just snapped forward by 2 full years. The cause wasn't a new government mandate or a strategic initiative. The pipeline became critical because it physically existed at the exact moment the global system needed it most. A piece of infrastructure politically contested for over a decade, labeled by critics as an unnecessary environmental liability, one that barely cleared regulatory approval, became one of the most strategically valuable energy assets on the entire Pacific Rim in a matter of weeks. The crisis in the Middle East didn't build this pipeline. It revealed what the pipeline always was, a latent geopolitical option, dormant, waiting for the world to price it correctly. And this is the mechanism at the heart of structural optionality. In an era of compounding global volatility, existing physical infrastructure, even infrastructure coasting well below its rated capacity, carries a strategic premium that no financial model can accurately forecast until the precise moment an external shock activates it. Now, if you're an Asian energy minister, this part of the story has a satisfying resolution. You found your barrels, your refineries kept running. But here's what almost nobody was paying attention to while those tankers loaded at Burnaby. Every single barrel flowing west to Asia is a barrel no longer flowing south to the United States. And American refineries, particularly those across the Pacific Northwest and the Midwest corridor that had quietly grown dependent on deeply discounted Canadian heavy crude for years, were about to discover what it feels like when your most reliable supplier suddenly has better customers. July 1st, 2026. Diplomats from Ottawa and Washington sit down for the most consequential trade review in a generation, the 16-year joint review of the USMCA. Triggered under Article 34.7, the rhetoric will be intense. Tariff threats, market access demands, the usual choreography of who needs whom more. And if you followed North American trade politics for any length of time, your instinct probably tells you the same story it always has. Canada enters that room at a disadvantage. Smaller economy, export dependent, structurally tethered to American demand. That narrative is dead. And the thing that killed it isn't a policy paper or a diplomatic breakthrough. It's infrastructure. The hard, physical kind that doesn't bend to speeches. Here's the engineering reality no trade negotiator can talk their way around. According to the EIA, Canadian crude accounts for 24% of total U.S. refinery throughput. Nearly a quarter of everything American refineries process comes from Canada. And the critical detail, the one that changes the entire power calculus, is what kind of crude we're talking about. U.S. Gulf Coast refineries, the backbone of American fuel production, were explicitly engineered to process heavy Canadian dilbit. Enbridge executives have a term for it. They call Canadian heavy crude their meat and potatoes staple. Skip the corporate polish on that phrase. It's a technical confession. These facilities were built at the molecular level to crack the specific chemical composition of Western Canadian Select. And before that crude ever reaches the Gulf Coast, it flows through Cushing, Oklahoma, the single largest commercial oil storage hub on the continent, and the physical pricing benchmark for North American crude. Cushing isn't just a waypoint, it's the routing anchor. Decades of pipeline build-out, Keystone, MarketLink, the Seaway system, hardwired Canadian heavy barrels into Cushing's storage and distribution network. The dependency isn't just at the refinery gate. It's embedded in the entire midstream architecture that feeds it. From wellhead to cracking tower, the infrastructure was poured in one direction. Now, could they theoretically switch? Here's what that would actually require. Billions of dollars in capital expenditure, years of engineering redesign, and a complete overhaul of coking units, desulfurization systems, and pipeline intake infrastructure. We're talking about industrial retooling that takes half a decade under ideal regulatory conditions. And American regulatory conditions are never ideal. So when Washington's trade team walks into that USMCA review and starts rattling sabers about Canadian energy imports, they're performing political theater on a stage where the outcome is already welded into the floor. The leverage they think they hold evaporated the moment those refineries were poured in concrete. Standard trade models assume symmetric optionality, as if the United States could credibly threaten to source heavy crude elsewhere. They can't. Venezuela is sanctioned and collapsing. Mexico's Maya crude is declining in both quality and output. The Middle Eastern barrels that match the chemical spec are flowing east now, not west. The global heavy crude market has tightened to the point where Canadian dilbit has become a physical requirement for American refining capacity. So let me reframe what actually happens at that negotiation table. Canada doesn't walk in as a petitioner. Canada walks in as the sole provider of a baseline feedstock the American refining machine physically cannot function without. Call it what it is, engineering captivity. The rhetoric will be loud. The cameras will roll. Someone in Washington will inevitably invoke energy independence. But rhetoric doesn't reconfigure a coking unit. Speeches don't rebuild a desulfurization tower. And political will, no matter how fierce, does not override the laws of thermodynamics and fluid dynamics that govern how heavy crude gets processed. Physics doesn't negotiate. And that trapped leverage, that's only half the picture. because while the United States was discovering it couldn't walk away from Canadian crude, Canada was already counting how many new buyers were lining up to take it. Here's the count. For decades, Canada's oil export map had exactly one arrow, pointing south, 4.4 million barrels per day flowing into the United States, feeding 63% of total U.S. crude imports. One pipeline corridor, one customer, one dependency. In energy economics, there's a term for that, captive supplier. And for the better part of Canada's modern petroleum history, that's precisely what we were. Every barrel we produced had one destination. Every negotiation started with the other side, knowing we had nowhere else to go. Now here's what changes when you build the physical infrastructure to break that constraint. I call this the structural optionality framework. Optionality in this context means one specific thing, having the physical hardware, the pipelines, the marine terminals, the tanker berths, to route your product to competing buyers in competing markets. Picture the difference between a landlocked terminal feeding a single pipeline corridor with fixed tolls and no exit, and a deepwater port with Aframax berths and open sea lanes to every major refining hub on the Pacific Rim. When you control the choke point, price discovery shifts, leverage shifts, the entire relationship shifts, and what was supposed to take years to materialize just snapped into place in 24. Here's the proof, and it's not subtle. By 2025, Vancouver Port crude exports doubled year over year, hitting 24.4 million tons. According to the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, TMX shipments to non-US destinations went from just 80,000 barrels per day in early 2024 to nearly 400,000 barrels per day by early 2020, a fivefold increase in under 12 months, not projected, measured. And the direction of those barrels tells the real story. More than 60% of TMX pipeline shipments are now flowing into Asia. According to Argus Media's December 2025 reporting, 2/3 of TMX crude went to the Asia-Pacific region. China alone accounted for 61% of those Indo-Pacific exports, a shift valued at 5.9 billion Canadian dollars, tracked by Reuters. This isn't a feasibility study. This isn't a trade minister's aspirational talking point on a conference slide. This is physical crude loaded onto Aframax tankers at the Westridge Marine Terminal, crossing the Pacific, arriving at refineries that weren't part of Canada's export playbook 18 months ago. And optionality in the oil market is power. The more routes and destinations you control, the less any single buyer can dictate your terms. Canada went from a single corridor economy, locked into one customer who knew we had no alternative, to an active multilateral seller receiving live bids from the fastest growing energy demand region on the planet. That transformation didn't unfold over a decade. It happened in months. And it's structural, meaning it doesn't reverse when headlines cool down. But here's where I need you to resist a very natural impulse. The impulse to treat everything you just heard as an unqualified victory, because acquiring this kind of sovereign leverage came at a cost. A staggering, concrete financial cost baked into every single barrel moving through that pipeline. If you walk away thinking Canada simply unlocked free optionality, you're missing the most critical variable in the entire equation, and that variable is exactly where this story gets uncomfortable. The TMX pipeline cost nearly 34 billion Canadian dollars to build, 5 times the original estimate. Let that land. 5 times. That kind of overrun doesn't just dent a balance sheet. It warps the entire economics of every barrel that flows through it. Here's how that plays out. To service that mountain of construction debt, toll rates on the expanded pipeline had to be set so high that before the Middle East crisis erupted, shippers were actually hesitant to book capacity. The pipeline that was supposed to liberate Canadian crude was, for a brief window, too expensive for some producers to justify using. The geopolitical shock changed that calculus overnight, but the debt didn't disappear. It got buried under urgency. Now layer on the transport economics. Piping heavy crude directly into Texas refineries, the old captive arrangement, is cheap, ruthlessly efficient, You're moving product through a fixed cost network with minimal handling. Shipping that same crude from the Westridge Marine Terminal onto tankers bound for China or India, completely different cost structure. Vessel chartering, hull insurance, weeks of Pacific transit, port handling at both ends. Marine freight to Northeast Asia stacks several dollars per barrel on top of already inflated TMX tolls. The revenue picture tells a real story, but only half of one. Between mid-2024 and 2025, the Western Canadian select discount to WTI narrowed by roughly $7 per barrel, generating an estimated $16.7 billion in additional revenue for Canadian producers per S&P Global 2025 data. That gain is genuine. Now run the other side of the ledger. TMX's debt-loaded tolls take their cut before a single tanker clears Westridge. Then the marine differential compounds, chartering, insurance, Pacific transit time, discharge fees. By the time a barrel of Canadian heavy reaches a refinery gate in Shandong versus one pipe to Port Arthur, Texas, the all-in delivery cost difference is not a rounding error. It is a structural margin tax. On a $7 per barrel improvement, the logistics of actually reaching Asia can consume a majority of the spread, turning a headline victory into a narrow, fragile margin that only holds while geopolitical premiums stay elevated. Stop. Look at those numbers one more time. $34 billion in debt, swollen marine tolls. Your instinct right now is to grimace, because this looks identical to every delayed, over-budget Canadian mega project you've ever groaned about. Refocus. Treating that debt purely as a financial penalty is a fatal misread of the board. That $34 billion is the geopolitical premium Canada finally paid to exit a captive market. You can argue it was too high. You can argue it was mismanaged, but you cannot deny it bought something that never existed before. The physical ability to say no to your only customer. The question is whether that premium is sustainable. The Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, IEFA, published a report in September 2025 stating it plainly. Long-term Asia diversification is, quote, unlikely to succeed if transportation costs are not competitive. That is the structural tension at the heart of this entire pivot. Optionality is real. Canada proved that over the last 12 months. But optionality has a carrying cost. And if marine logistics remain expensive relative to pipeline delivery into the US, the gravitational pull of the old arrangement doesn't vanish. It just operates on a longer leash. Which leaves us with this. Given the massive $34 billion construction bill and the persistent offshore shipping premiums, was this geopolitical leverage worth the cost? Or is Canada trading one form of dependence for a more expensive version of the same trap? Drop your analysis in the comments. But whatever your conclusion, it's only half the board. Because the physical movement of crude from Vancouver to Shanghai isn't only a shipping story. Every one of those tankers is actively feeding a separate, parallel fragmentation, one that operates far beyond oil prices, deep in the architecture of how that oil gets paid for. Here's the mechanism most analysts miss. When you reroute the hardware, you eventually reroute the money. TMX sending Canadian crude across the Pacific isn't happening in isolation. Across the Indian Ocean, through the Strait of Hormuz, along tanker lanes from West Africa to Guangzhou, physical energy supply chains are quietly splintering away from their Cold War-era corridors. TMX is one local thread in a much larger global unraveling. Think of it this way. For decades, global oil moved through a small number of established choke points. Pipelines, port, straits, and each choke point came packaged with a built-in financial operating system. Dollar-denominated contracts, dollar-settled insurance, dollar-cleared letters of credit. The currency followed the crude because the infrastructure demanded it. Now fragment that infrastructure. Send tankers on new routes through different ports, serving buyers who operate outside the traditional dollar ecosystem. The financial rule set governing those routes starts to fragment too. The currency stops following the crude. It follows the buyer, and we can see this playing out in real time. China now purchases more than 80% of Iran's oil exports, frequently settling those transactions through yuan-based arrangements. During the 2026 disruptions, some vessels passing through the Strait of Hormuz were required to pay specific transit-related charges in Chinese yuan, at one of the most strategically sensitive choke points on the planet. Now, before anyone extrapolates this into a death of the dollar headline, let's be precise with the data. According to S&P Global, the US dollar still accounts for roughly 57% of global foreign exchange reserves. That is overwhelming structural dominance. Meanwhile, cross-border trade settled in yuan has grown from less than 1% in 2012 to 3.7% globally by 2024. Real growth? Absolutely. A replacement for the dollar? Not remotely. What it actually represents is a localized workaround. In specific corridors, at specific choke points between specific trading partners, non-dollar settlement is becoming the path of least resistance. Think of it less as an overthrow and more as a routing around operation. One tanker, one invoice, one port charge at a time, wherever the physical infrastructure permits. And that's the deeper insight worth holding onto. The multipolar shift in energy is a physical revolution first. Steel, shipping lanes, pipeline capacity that drags finance behind it like a shadow. Every new physical route that bypasses traditional hubs chips away slowly at the assumption that every barrel on Earth must clear through dollar architecture. TMX is one chip. The Strait of Hormuz is another. Individually, marginal, collectively, they're redrawing the map. So where does that leave Canada? Operating a newly commissioned Pacific export corridor, shipping into the fastest growing energy demand zone on the planet, at exactly the moment when the financial plumbing of that zone is being actively rewired. The global picture is now sharp, but global pictures don't write policy briefs. Ottawa does. And what Ottawa needs right now has nothing to do with more theory about multipolar currency shifts. It needs a concrete operational framework for converting this structural optionality into durable sovereign advantage. The kind of playbook you can put on a minister's desk tomorrow morning. That's exactly where we're going. Here's what that playbook looks like. For decades, Canada's biggest infrastructure projects have died the same death. Provincial opposition, federal hesitation, regulatory paralysis, court challenges, repeat. A veto cycle so entrenched that most professionals in this country have simply accepted it as permanent. TMX just shattered that assumption, and the mechanism is brutally simple. Money. $16.7 billion in projected revenue uplift. That number didn't just silence critics. It forcibly realigned the entire political apparatus. The BC government, which spent years actively blocking this pipeline, reversed course. Provincial and federal operators who couldn't coordinate a launch order are now coordinating expansion phases. Trans Mountain launched an open season process in 2025, targeting an initial 200 to 300,000 barrels per day of additional capacity. Drag reducing agent optimizations are projected to add 90,000 barrels per day by 2027. New pumping stations could push another 360,000 barrels per day within 5 years. That's a second pipeline's worth of capacity being layered onto the first. And here's what most people miss. That kind of capability doesn't vanish when the immediate crisis passes. It becomes embedded in the long-term structure of the market. The buyers are locked in, the shipping routes are established, the revenue flows are proven. What started as emergency infrastructure becomes permanent strategic architecture. This is exactly where the structural optionality framework stops being theory and becomes an operational mandate. Take LNG. Canada's West Coast liquefied natural gas corridor faces the exact same veto cycle TMX faced a decade ago. Indigenous consultation delays, environmental litigation, provincial federal jurisdictional friction. But the TMX precedent provides a template. Proven revenue changes the political calculus. When you can point to $16 billion and say, this is what happens when you actually build, the cost of blocking shifts from abstract principle to measurable economic loss. That is a fundamentally different conversation. Critical minerals corridors, same story. The world is scrambling for lithium, cobalt, nickel, materials Canada holds in abundance but can't move to market efficiently. Apply the same framework, identify the physical choke point, build the export optionality, let the revenue proof collapse the political resistance. Sequenced, evidence-backed execution that treats infrastructure as sovereign leverage. If you're a professional watching this, in policy, in energy, in trade advisory, this is the lens you take into every conversation about stalled projects. When someone tells you a corridor is permanently blocked, ask one question: has the revenue case been proven at scale? Because TMX demonstrated that once you cross that threshold, the veto cycle doesn't gradually weaken, it snaps. And that brings us to the deepest truth this entire story reveals. Global power in the 21st century doesn't flow from diplomatic speeches or trade agreements alone. It flows through physical scale, pipelines, terminals, shipping lanes. The nations that control the physical movement of critical resources don't ask for leverage. They have it. If this analysis sharpened how you see Canada's position in a shifting global order, subscribe. I break down the structural forces reshaping this country's trajectory with the rigor and clarity you won't find in the news cycle. Hit like if this framework gave you something you can actually use. I'll see you in the next one.